Hello everyone, welcome to Going Beyond Viewability, Understanding and Utilising Attention Time Testing. My name is Stanley Thomas, I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by Joanna Evenden, the Head of Commercial Product here at Crimtan. Now, before we start, just a brief bit about who we are at Crimtan, what we do. We are an omni-channel digital marketing partner focusing on programmatic, and we use three key pillars, as you can see here: audience intelligence, creative intelligence, and investment intelligence to unify your programmatic capabilities. We also have our own internal products, including a cookieless solution that mean we're ahead of the curve on data privacy, as you see there, and can perform the best campaigns with the least invasive movements. Now, Joe, I'll take us quickly through the agenda before we move forward. Understanding viewability being our first point. What is it? How does it work? And then moving on to what attention time is, the same questions, why it's important, and then looking at one specific case study as an analysis. So, Joe, I think the first question that I think we're all wondering, what is viewability?
Thank you, Stan. Yeah, so I think a lot of people will be familiar with what viewability is on the call, but just to break it down is essentially how many people have viewed your ad potentially that you're sending out there. And the way we measure it at the moment is, well, at least 50% of your ad is in view for 1 second. Now, viewability has been around for quite a long time, and there has been a period of time where people are using viewability as a core, metric to understand if it's been viewable, and that's a core KPI for them. So yeah, it's been quite a big thing in the industry so far, and rightly so. You want to make sure that the ads or the impressions that you're putting out there are potentially being viewed.
Absolutely. I suppose the question that arises obviously from this webinar is, are there any issues with it? What might some drawbacks be?
Yeah, so viewability has a couple of different drawbacks. So, just because something says it's viewable, it doesn't actually mean that someone has viewed it, unfortunately. So just to put that into context, I could be watching TV while I'm on my laptop, while I'm on my phone. I might get served an ad on my mobile device, and I'm actually paying attention to the TV, but actually, as digital marketers, it might count as being viewable because it's come up in 50% in view for at least a few seconds, but actually I haven't really paid attention to it. So having it as a core KPI or one of those metrics that you're using can actually create difficulties in actually, understanding that fuller picture. So we recognise at Crimtan that viewability is important, but actually it's actually not a massive holistic view of whether something is actually being viewed.
Interesting. So moving on from viewability then, what is attention time? How are you defining that?
So attention time, to put it quite simply, is a relatively new tool. I mean, there's various different ways of measuring it that aims to measure the length of time that people are actually using your potential ad or engaging with it, basically. And that's the best way to explain what attention time is, and that's how we talk about it at Crimtan as well.
Now, you mentioned that there were various ways to measure. Could you take us through what some of those are?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways of different measurements in the industry, and I think one of them, which has had quite a lot of attention at the moment, is eye tracking technology. It's essentially where they use technology to track your eye movements and understand if you're actually paying attention to that particular ad. Now, it's very smart technology, and some of the positives is can be quite accurate in understanding that, because it's actually tracking your eyes, which is quite freaky, really. But some of the cons with it is the scale is limited. I mean, everyone's aware of privacy and data that's coming up. Not everyone's going to want their eye movements tracked, and so therefore how it's used is very panel based at the moment, which can limit your scale, but also sometimes it's not as vastly used as you might want it to be. Then there's a second way of looking at attention time metrics. So, and that's how people like IS or Moat are using it. And that's when they use multiple different metrics to understand what that holistic view of attention time is. So it's not just one thing that we're looking at. Now, some of the positives of this, the scale is quite high. It's non-intrusive, so the user doesn't know that you're using it. It's nothing more than you would standardly use on your standard tags. But some of the cons to that is, it is quite new in the industry, and you can see a number of different people using different ways of measuring it, and actually the benchmarking is not quite there yet. It's like, for example, when we saw footfall arise about 10 years ago, the benchmarking in the industry had to take a few years to get there. That's the same with attention time at the moment.
Awesome. So that's different ways to look at it in the industry. How's it done here at Crimtan?
Yes, so Crimtan look at the latter version of where you look at multiple different metrics that make up attention time. And so you can see those 4 metrics there. So essentially what we look at first of all is viewability. So as I said, it's not that we don't think viewability is important anymore, but we recognise it's the first step to make sure that something is potentially in view. The next is making sure that is in time in view for a long time, so 15 seconds, for example, industry benchmarks, to understand, if it's in view for a multiple different seconds, you're more likely potentially to view that ad. But as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone has viewed it. So we also look at creative dwell. So creative dwell is looking at, is somebody hovering over that particular ad, and on a mobile device, it's whether they're hovering and holding onto that. Now, somebody might say out there, I'm sure, you could just leave your mouse on a creative and you might go to the toilet, and, then you have a high creative dwell for desktop, a bit different for mobile. So that's why we're looking at engagement rate. So engagement rate is like the last tick metric, for example, to make sure that someone's engaged with your ad. So that's whether they're scrolling, moving up and down, clicking on it, engaging with that particular ad that we're using. So yeah, they're the 4 metrics that we look at Crimtan, quite similar to how, IS and Moat are looking at it at the moment.
Fantastic. Now, forgive me if this sounds rude, but what does it matter? What's the value of attention time?
Yeah, so I think attention time is important because I think when you think back in the old days when we didn't have digital media or anything like that, the whole reason we wanted, to make creative and get advertisements out there is so it draws people's attention. And I think we've forgotten a little bit about that in the programmatic industry, but it makes sense. And I don't know why we haven't really spoken about it a bit sooner in terms of measurement, because without attention time, you're not going to be driving any other of your KPIs. How are you going to drive sales, for example, if you haven't originally captured attention? How are you going to do a click-through awareness? And, it's that extra step before any of those other KPIs that you're looking at there. Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for taking us through attention time. What might that look like in situ, in a real campaign?
Yeah, so we've brought along a case study with us today. So it was Asian Tourism Board. And some of the things that they were looking at was trying to encourage people to visit the country. So what they really wanted to do is make sure they had really engaging, high impactful creative, but also to draw that attention to make sure that people were actually spending time on their site to sort of gain interest into visiting, for example. And you can see there the top line results. So, you have 75% viewability, you've got time in view, we're reaching 20 seconds, creative dwell, we got 3.2 seconds, and then engagement rate around 1.5%. So I guess some of you are probably looking at that and think, well, what does that mean? So what we wanted to do is break it down a little bit down to the creative. So for example, what creative was driving the highest viewability? We looked at what creative was driving the highest time in view, what creative was driving the highest creative dwell, and then also looking at the highest engagement rate. And what you could see there is actually Cube was showing the highest attention time metrics throughout what we were seeing, and actually Cube was showing the highest conversion. So we're seeing a top line correlation between Cube and attention time metrics with that conversion as well.
Awesome. And now obviously correlation, which we can see there very strong, not necessarily causation. Do you have anything we can dig into might be a bit stronger?
Yeah, so at Grimtown, we have our own analytics and insights team. And I think one of the things that we wanted to look at in a little bit further, because that was quite top line, is actually what is the influence per metric on that actual conversion rate. So you can see here within that diagram there that actually, viewability is still playing a part, as we said, but that's only 9.6% influence on whether that's going on to convert. But you can see actually here, they're all playing their part, even though engagement, increased dwell is of a larger share, they're all playing their part in actually driving that conversion. So you can see they're split there. But I think even looking down to it even further, so if you look at even more findings, what we found is all of them all together were influencing that conversion by 16%. So attention time metrics influenced, if you're driving high, on that site conversion by 16%. And when we looked at other programmatic strategies, such as, the right location, the right creative domains, and so on, we started influencing that site visit by 57%. So what you can see this suggests is, as many people say in the market, it's not the silver bullet, and that's not what we're saying at Grimtown, but we recognise there is an impact of attention time metrics, and combined with those right programmatic strategies to drive that site conversion as well.
Yeah. So we can see on the slide here talking about optimising in future campaigns. What recommendations were made with this specific campaign?
Yeah, so as I spoke about before, what was really great about the client that we worked with is that they were really open about the type of creative that they're using. So alongside some of sort of older creative types, such as static banners, we were be able to create stuff like Scratch, Cube, and video and camera, for example, which were a lot more engaging. But what we recommended to clients is to make sure that they were using a lot more variations of these particular creatives that were driving high attention time, and just to completely remove static banners from their creative strategy, because it really was seeing poor attention time and poor conversion rate. So really bringing it back to basics, but also recognizing actually optimizing towards particularly engagement rate and dwell time really is going to show like high rates with your conversion as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for talking me through it as a relative newbie. If you guys on the call have any questions, please do reach out to us. We'll give you a few minutes now to come up with any, and we'll come back in a few. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. We've received a few questions, and I think, Joe, if you're okay answering them, we'll go through them now. So first question we have here, which clients does attention time measurement work best for?
So on a whole, I think attention time metrics need to be used across every single client. I don't think there's anyone that could not be using attention time metrics at the moment. I think the way the industry is going is that eventually you will see everyone using it like you do with viewability. Now, one of the things I realize is a problem at the moment is, a lot of clients can get stuck on using static banners due to budgets and so on, and that they don't have the budgets maybe for us to create or so on. So that can be a bit of a limitation if you're sort of maybe a smaller client that can't invest so much into the creative strategy. But on a whole, as long as you do have that creative there and you're able to invest into that right creative, attention time is going to be useful for all clients, I believe. I don't think there's anyone out there that, wouldn't be using it in, 10 years time, example.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joe. Another question. Does attention time measurement take a lot of extra budget or time to implement?
I think attention time is relatively easy for us to implement. There's nothing else that you have to do on the client side. It's something that we take care of. So in a short, no, there's no extra budgets to it either. It's very easy to use. It's just a very minimum, low third-party sort of tracking way of doing it. And I think that's going to, as I said before, it's going to be the way it's going in the future as well. You're not going to charge for attention time metrics. It's just going to be a standard that you have from your company and something that you should ask for. In terms of budgets, for example, I think it comes back to the creative point. You're not going to see good attention time metrics if any sort of agencies out there, if the creative is not very good. So you need to make sure that you're investing budgets into your creative to drive the attention time results that maybe you want to show that you're doing, a good job towards your brand or agency or whatever it might be.
Fantastic. I think one more question we've got time for. What would you say, Jo, are the biggest challenges with measuring attention time?
I think challenges with attention time is a multiple different things, really. I think first of all, as I spoke about before, is eye tracking technology is probably the most accurate way to do it. But we're gonna have problems with scales and privacy. But then the second thing with it as well is the way we're measuring at the moment. It's going to take a while to get to a benchmark industry and for that to be regulated properly, and and everyone to become aware of how to use it. And I think until then, everyone's sort of trying to do their best to make it as great as it is. So I think that's some of the challenges that you potentially see out there as well.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Jo, and thanks to you guys for watching and for submitting questions. I feel like I've learned a lot today. I hope you have as well. Thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.